Okay, we're recording, so stay tuned. To the first order of business is a roll call. I'm going to ask Ed McManus to do a roll call so we can keep attendance. I think you have a 2+1, right? I should point out, Mark L's the town administrator. Where is he? He gets the award for the biggest struggle to get here to the. Okay, next. One. That's great. Thank you. Ed, would you mind reading the treasurer's report for the association? Yes, the abbreviated report, the balance. Very good. Thank you. Do I have a motion to accept the treasurer's report? All right. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Passes unanimously. Thank you. All right. The next item on our agenda is, well, before I introduce our friends at Mass Municipal Association, what I'd like to do is acknowledge our legislative delegation. We have Julian Sear here, as everybody knows, Senator Sear. Thank you. Representative Diggs is here, Representative Moakley, Representative Luddy. Did I miss anybody, Senator Julian? No, that's great. A round of applause for our delegation. I wanted to make sure that we acknowledge their presence because I know there are two that might have to be early before a lot of the Q&A kicks in. So there are other things going on. They have an incredibly busy schedule. We appreciate the fact that you're here, and we look forward to, for those that may have to leave early, we look forward to an ongoing dialogue on many of the things that we talk about here today. So one of the things that I enjoy as president of this association is our regular meetings with Mass Municipal. I think one of the things that's critically important for us as an association, but also for all select board members and all municipal managers, is we rely incredibly on the hard work and all of the analysis and legislative advocacy that they do on our behalf. And one of the reasons why it's important that they come here from time to time is so that they can get a flavor of some of the Cape perspective on issues, some of the things that we're wrestling with. And as you all know, that in the past, we've had some very unique issues that we've really wanted to press upon our legislature and folks in the administration. And, you know, MMA has been a huge help in being an advocate for us. And wastewater comes to the top of the list, but also housing and transportation. There's just a whole laundry list of issues that are important to us. And I think one of the things that we like to stress is the way in which some of these issues are uniquely dealt with here on Cape Cod. We like to think we're special. We like to think that we're different, that sometimes the cookie cutter approach to solving the Commonwealth's problems don't necessarily fit well here on Cape Cod. So sometimes we have to take a unique approach in terms of solving some of the problems here. And Mass Municipal has done a great job in listening to us and being a real advocate and partner for us. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn this over to David Kaufman, at the Legislative Director for Mass Municipal, and he'll get into today's presentation. So David, round of applause, please.
Well, thank you, Mark. join the party here. But, I do want to say, really want to thank all of you. Incredible. Did already get once a day. Very either way. Market, you mentioned locally. We always have this. Senior. Okay. Oh, this is unnerving. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, there you go. Really what we do is we present we can help our perspective, our key issues, as Mark talked about it, just representing all 350 Dave Kaufman at the MMA, Josie Alberg, Daniel Yee. We got some additional great partners in the organization, Denise Baker at the MMA, Owen Page at the MMA, friends in Cabot. All of that really representing our cities to support municipal officials in a really challenging time. But I do want to just mention, we typically have done these presentations. We're going to get to a lot of the details, talking about the state revenue picture, the impact from the federal government, really is the clouds in the horizon, ballot questions, a lot of fun things, and a lot of key issues. I do want to mention, because of this tight time frame, we've typically had the Q&A and discussion at the end. We will still do that, but because I know some of our friends from the state also are on their tight timeline, I don't know if anyone wants to come up to just talk a little bit. Now, there's senators here, everybody.
Good morning. It's good to see all you folks and whoever's online. We have actually several this morning, so we're going to be meeting with we have we think actually the second largest employer across Cape Cod, our DDS service providers here. So we're going to be dashing off to Margaritaville in a second, but really want to thank Cape Cod Tech for hosting us yet again. I think some folks are here for a behavioral health roundtable we had last month with the new Health and Human Services Secretary. I think we'll be back here actually for a legislative breakfast with them. So really just grateful for the tech. Really want to thank MMA, their whole team, especially Dave Kaufman. Dave and I go way back. Back when I was I was a mid-level bureaucrat. Dave was a legislative aide. Younger, I was thinner. But in Dave Kaufman, well, no, Dave looks good. Dave, you look good, man. But I don't know, always very slimming, right? But MMA is such a valuable partner, right? They have an unenviable task, right? Here in Massachusetts, so much of what we do is executed at the local level. And as we even know on Cape Cod, right, we have quite a big difference among our towns, right? Truro and Bourne can be quite different places. I think the hallmark of what gives a lot of strength for Cape Codders is, really there's a culture of togetherness and a culture of collaboration. We just saw that, right, with the blizzard we had. No other region in the Commonwealth actually has the cool intermunicipal coordination that we have. All sort of pulling together, with help from everyone. I think that's a real hallmark of success. I think we've seen, and we have a real track record, and this legislative delegation has a real track record of solving big challenges, even when they feel insurmountable. Case in point, wastewater, Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund, right now in its 5th, 6th year, over $300 million in other people's money, saving taxpayers in each of your towns, 25% of the bill on sewer. That is extraordinary. That is better than Sarah Peak and I could have ever dreamed when we wrote this law and we passed it in 2018. And so I think we're of course we need to keep tinkering with that. We have an environmental bond bill the Senate's going to be taking up in coming weeks. Lots of good things for Cape Cod in there, including wastewater, including coastal resilience. I think we need to be taking the same approach to the other big challenges of the region. Housing is first, second, and third. If you come to my neck of the woods on the Outer Cape, in Provincetown and Truro and Walkley, he said this is becoming existential, right? We're really wondering about how do we sustain ourselves and be around communities when effectively the price of housing is just out of reach of most all working year-round people who don't yet own a home. to inherit a home. And really, this is a real big challenge for towns, right? How do you staff a town that, by the way, throws a really damn big party every year in July and August, when you just whatever you pay, people actually can't afford to be in that town. And that issue is sort of moving down the peninsula. There's a very predictable pattern in the real estate market in this resort destination. And I think we're really trying to figure out, that should be my view. So people really trying to figure out how do we bring tools around housing. Seasonal communities is a key part of that. Rep Diggs, Rep Letty, Rep Moakley, and I are all serving on this advisory council. Like any statute, any law, we're refining this. We're trying to figure out how to make it stronger and better. I think the big challenge now is we got to figure out how do we pay for this. Our colleagues in the state would just say, okay, look, you guys can pay for this on your relatively low property taxes. We know, all of us know that's not a meeting. So we're spending a lot of time in the delegation, really trying to lead and really trying to figure out, okay, we've got a playbook on wastewater. We did this really well, damn hard. How do we actually bring that same creativity, that same interconnectedness, while really understanding the unique factors and the unique aspects of each of our towns? How do we bring that to bear? And there's a whole from Dave about big concerns around financing, right? You guys are just so constricted. I really think the way the state divvies out local aid is deeply unfair. I actually only just learned that the UGA dollars, this isn't a formula. This is based on like what we did historically. You don't even want to know how much money Boston gets per person. It's outrageous, like $230 per person. And I just thought, anyway, so we're looking at those issues. I'm really grateful for the partnership. Please don't be shy about reaching out to us. I'm going to turn this over to my other fantastic colleagues. We have such strong tradition in this delegation of not only working in a bipartisan, but I think more critically in Massachusetts, working across House and Senate. This collaboration is rare. Most House members really rather steer clear of their state senators. I hope that's not the case. And I know that's not the case with this delegation. We work really hard to be collaborative good partners with all of you and with each other. So I'm going to turn this over to Rep Diggs, who is a phenomenal partner and a joy to work with.
I'm going to be shorter, but the point. I'm on Ways and Means. I'm the Assistant Vice Chair of Ways and Means. We had a hearing in Hyannis, economic, eco-dev, housing, workforce development. Those are all huge things because, like Julian said about seasonal communities, that's something that we need to talk about. We need to make sure that everybody knows, that we're similar to places. So we get strength by being able to be similar to Western Mass, but different. So we need to make sure that we keep those things going. Then I went to Amherst, and we were talking about dredging. So dredging is a very important issue on the Cape, making sure that we're coastal resilience is being done. So those are things that, making sure that because you're in Bass River, well, one side of the river is Yarmouth, and the next side of the river is Dennis, and you can't bring the material from Yarmouth to Dennis. Doesn't make sense. So we're trying to come up with a solution so that we can save our Cape area money to really make sure stand and resiliency is being done. So we're going to Mattapan on the 20th. Then we go to Clinton, then we go to Fall River somewhere. So we're just jumping all around Massachusetts, trying to figure out what's going on, what various places need, but also knowing that on the Cape we have a lot of our Cape delegation is very in tune with our district and making sure that we get what we need so that we're successful. So thank you for having us, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Good morning. Great to see you all here in my district, the Fort Barnstable, which comes from Harvest Provincetown. And just to add to what my colleagues are saying, one of the best parts of this job really is to work with our partners at the town level and hear from all of you and hear from all of our constituents about your concerns, your through ideas, all of the opportunities that we have to work together to build an even stronger community. And I just want to add, Senator Sears spoke about seasonal communities as well as refugees. There's a lot of opportunities that we look forward to working with you all to really unlock additional housing development opportunities that are really on that smaller scale that folks have been asking about and wanting to see unlocked as opportunities. So we look forward to working on those efforts together. And I can't say enough about particularly what we saw in the most recent storm in terms of incredible collaboration among all of our towns across the entire Cape Islands, and what a difference that makes. And so a lot of that is working with each of you to be sure that we can serve our community. So thank you to the MMA. Thanks for being here today. I look forward to continuing to work with you all.
The benefit of being a new guy in delegation, you usually not add very much at the very end. I'll just mention two things on the super community. I know there's some towns out there that are still considering it. Would highly recommend it for a number of reasons. You've heard Senator Sear mention many of them as the legislation was passed last year, and but now the money's starting to flow. I represent 9 towns. 8 of them just got a combined total of over $1 million for housing projects, including the town of Gosnell, with a population of about 40. So there's a benefit to getting on that train early, because that money is going to be distributed between more and more towns as people start to recognize what incredible benefit. Then the second thing I just want to mention, the Chapter 90 bill that the legislature passed last year had a historic increase to local aid for roads, infrastructure, bridges, etc. And that was based on public road mileage rather than huge benefit to our region. So hopefully that's been helpful. Make sure that you also get all of your costs related to the storm reported to your emergency management director, in hopes that federal money can eventually come through. So thank you very much for having us. Thank you, Mark. And shout out to Heather on doing.
Thank you all, and just to add to that, I know, well, oh, I'm sorry, Senator, yes, motion, Senator. I forget about the last election. So, good to see you all again, and thank you again for the entire delegation. Great large state delegation talking about issues of importance, important areas. As I just jump into a couple different things, I wanted to introduce, really to kick off from a PSA standpoint, our project and research coordinator at the MMA, really backbone to the legislative division, kicking start this presentation and over some PSA presentation.
Thank you, Dave. As you mentioned, my name is Daniel Yee, research coordinator for education at the MMA. So glad you could be here. My part will be very brief. Just want to get a few PSAs out of the way for the MMA before we get started. The real meat of the There we go. Okay, so following some brief PSA, we'll jump right into discussing the fiscal picture and state revenue. We'll also talk about some of the bills that we are watching very closely this session. We'll also cover some updates in the regulatory space, particularly in the world of energy and environment. We'll also talk about some of the priorities that are on the horizon for us. And finally, we'll open up to a time for questions and comments. So just quickly want to introduce the legislative division at the MMA. You saw Dave Kaufman, he's our senior legislative director, and he also covers issues related to personnel and labor relations, and you'll hear from him very shortly as well. We also have Ali DiMatteo, our legislative and policy counsel, also expert on municipal and regional administration. Josie Alberg, our senior analyst covering energy and environment, and who you'll also hear from shortly. We also have Adrian Nunez, our expert on all things fiscal policy. Violet Dare, our newest addition to the team, covering issues of transportation, public works, and public utilities. And finally, myself, Dan Yee, project and research coordinator. And as always, if you have any questions pertaining to any of our portfolios, the whole team is more than happy to help. I'm really here to support you. So once again, thank you so much for being here, making it out to Harwich. Currently, the other half of our team is in Clinton, hosting a legislative breakfast for folks over there. We say this every spring and fall when we host these breakfasts, but we really do try to cater to as many of our members as possible and hit every corner of the state to the best of our ability. So we're very grateful to these 6 communities for hosting us this spring, and hopefully we'll be in some of your communities in the fall. Also want to mention our legislative alerts. So these are time-sensitive emails that we send out to all of our members, and they really pertain to all the issues that are in contention at the State House. They're critical to the advocacy work that we do, and we really rely on all of you to help us be the voice on behalf of cities and towns and expressing your concerns and your thoughts to the legislature on all these important issues that are affecting every community. So we hope that you are paying attention to these alerts, and if you are not currently receiving them, please reach out to me or anyone else on the team. We'd love to get you connected. So our friends in the communications division put together a weekly newsletter. It goes straight to your email inbox every Friday, and it's really just a digest of all the most significant headlines from that week, all in one place. So it's just a great way to stay in tune with everything that's going on with our work and just around the Commonwealth. So if you are interested, it's free. You can sign up at /newsletter. So they have also been busy, our friends in comms, with a new podcast called The 351. It's hosted by our executive director, Adam Kathleen, as well as our communications director, John Roulette. And they frequently bring on guests onto the show, just provide insight on all the challenges and stories and innovations that are going on around the Commonwealth. So just another way to get plugged into all the happenings that's going on in our state. And you can listen to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, and our website. We could also always use more photos of your communities. So if you have any photos that show off, natural resources, municipal buildings, community gatherings, or even your downtown area of your community, we would love to have those photos to use in a weekly review, the Beacon, and our website. So that'd be a great help to us. You can send those photos to photos@MMA.org. Finally, just a plug for our social media, just another way to keep in touch with all the work that our organization does. Our tag is @Mass Municipal on Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn. And with that, I will pass it back to Dave to kick off the legislative.
Let's hear it for Dan, everybody. And he didn't mention it, but the 351 podcast, most recent episode, tremendous guest. He's talking about advocacy, Beacon Hill, very eloquent, and strangely, you can find he's a tall guy too. But it's me, everybody. So, all right. So as we kick off a bit of what we're I really want to carve out as much time as possible for.
USA district competitors, people that don't have a common for the award ceremony. Teachers, you can trigger an email from Ms. Riley to see who's on the list. Thank you.
All right. So everyone hear that. So as I'm going to try to carve out as much time as for really a robust discussion at the end, Q&A, questions on what we have. But let's talk and really kick off from something I like to talk about. When are we in this larger connectivity to the legislative session? What's going on? And really not just every time since January 2025, but also in the home stretch over the next couple of months. Right? What is this going to mean in that home stretch? That green dot there, that green bubble is really generally where we are right now as it relates to the 19-ish months or 19 plus months of a legislative session, starting in January 2025 and going over to July or the end of July 2026, which is the throughout all of this, right, this has all been tied into changes in the federal administration, federal funding, some of the direct impact potentially on state revenues as it relates to federal policy. But for this is really about entering this home stretch of the legislative session. And two things I'll mention. In the context of just under a year ago from now, there was an agreement between the House and Senate to change, really amend and reform some of its rules. Really, the rules between the House and Senate and how they conduct their business. Own rules, Senate has its own rules, and they're joint rules, and really how they handle primarily legislative matters in legislature. And a big part of that was trying to say, let's get a lot more bills through the process and get it out of the process earlier. And a big part of that was really already playing out with a lot more bills moving forward one way or another. What does that mean at the end of the game? That's still to be determined. But right now, a lot of bills, thousands of bills that are filed, and the hundreds of bills that have a direct municipal impact. These are still going through the legislative process, but a lot are still progressing favorably in case still in the mix earlier in the process. It's going to be providing a lot of clarity. So actually, next week is another deadline for a lot of that action and how that will play out. Starting this home stretch as it relates from mid-March, with the budget going on at the same time, and then into July. Now, the second piece I'll talk about is a caveat with some of the it's historically been the end of the formal session where, most of the bills that would happen after are really non-controversial. In this case, this is still an important deadline, but it's a deadline for bills to be sent to a conference. So likely bills that agreed to handle together, and then likely have to reconcile any differences through a 6-member conference committee. That can still transpire after July 31st and something else. Really, this is the first iteration that's going to be part of the rules. So we'll plan a lot still on the table. As you heard the delegation talk about, as you hear. So let's start talking about, of course, the headwinds of evidence. Right? I mentioned the federal government. I mentioned some of the first and main focus for what the revenue picture is. But right now, let's look at where we are more than halfway through the fiscal year. February is, of course, the smallest month in collections. It's still important as we think about what does the trend look like for January, where February is released to the same month last year. That's under 10% for February 2025. What the benchmark was for fiscal 26, it's actually 2.6. Again, good progress. It does have some similarities to what January. Nothing in terms of a boom or expected boom, but in an area or in a time where everyone does feel this kind of vice-like effect at the local level, and the state is feeling this pressure towards what does the national economy, the international affairs look like on a day-to-day basis. That's challenging. As the receipts are coming in, still very good and still above benchmark, which is really important. Year to date, we're coming through the beginning of fiscal 26, just over 26 million has been received, 3.6% for last fiscal year. From a benchmark standpoint of what they're expecting, right? What they budgeted for, what they projecting 2.3. So that's good news and still something to be monitoring. I think, you talk to 20 different answers, but in this case, we know for fiscal 26, it does look like we are weathering that, which I think is important, right? We are not too far off from a fiscal 26. And despite some of the concerns over the federal reconciliation bill I'll talk about, this was a situation that there was expanded 9C authority really allow the administration to allow local aid. That was on the table. It's not on the table anymore. But this is by looking into the most critical funding. And People with more towards a laptop. All right. So, and right now, that's fiscal 26, but where are we now as it relates to the next state budget? And I know Rep. Diggs in particular is Assistant Vice Chair on House Ways and Means. Is already talking about some of these joint Ways and Means hearings that are already happening across the state, will continue for the next several weeks as well. That's part of the fiscal 27 budget process, already kicked off. And the first part of that, as it relates to revenue, is tied into what that consensus revenue figure is. And that is tied into an agreement between the administration and the House and Senate towards what are they projecting for fiscal 27 with all the uncertainty, with all the clouds in the horizon. What can they expect and what do they want to plan for budgeting purposes? Again, they're planning for just under 45 billion of receipts, 2.9% above fiscal 26, including 2.7 for that third tax that is dedicated to education and transportation. All right. So the governor, the next part of the process, right, is the governor filing her budget. She filed it in late January, a big announcement at our conference. Maybe any of you were there. So let's talk about what she covered here. Got the pointer working. Okay. And that works. Perfect. Fiscal 27 budget, everybody. I'll go over a couple different areas here, right? $63 billion budget proposal. It's known as House 2. It's really the filed as House 2, but it's the governor's budget recommendation for fiscal 27. And two, I think, main areas: unrestricted federal government funding of 0.5%. As you can imagine, that is not enough. That's nowhere near enough, actually, in terms of the needs in cities and towns. But that is, I think, tying into a historical perspective on what the governor has done in recent years of having that figure very close to the consensus revenue figure I just mentioned. And I'll just mention, I'll talk about the report in a few minutes, but for a couple of different recommendations that we've made, we have talked about this reinvestment, this reinfusion of funding through unrestricted aid that is needed out there as a way to mitigate the impacts that are already creating massive challenges in your communities. And part of that is this 351 for 351 proposal of this really restoration of a state and local fiscal partnership. Certainly great for. So that's a big part of it. We know that's a big ask, right? That's not lost on us, but we time is now to exactly get a stake on the ground towards the next step, 0.7. Think about how do we make this clarity as clear as possible for our communities. The second piece is tied into Chapter 70, right? The Student Opportunity Act, where put more than $1 billion into the Chapter 70 program. But we also know that the investments, it depends on the district. In many cases, the vast majority, I think at this point, up to 80% of districts are now known as minimum aid as it relates to the minimum per pupil increase in the fiscal year. But this is the last year of the implementation of this form as well. The investments are 3.2% over the previous year. And one of those per pupil figures, which has really been this important barometer, being a rising tide in this education environment. Last year was at $150 per pupil. Again, the governor, similar to what he did last year, $5 per student. School transportation, we know how massively expensive school transportation is. Regional school transportation was funded just over 80%, actually 87% of the expected need for fiscal 27. Out of district vocational transportation, just under 7 million. That's much smaller in comparison, but we also know there's been a lot more limited funding for that, and that is a massive budget buster for out of district vocational transportation. Rural school aids, some sizable increase as part of this proposal. Funded at $12 million last year, $20 million as part of the recommendation, as well as expanded eligibility towards rural districts. Special ed circuit breaker. This is talking about a massive funding in terms of the cost increases, and especially as a reimbursement program, really and limited reimbursement program has caused so many challenges. Knowing the need is critical. We know the importance of special education in our classrooms, in our communities, but the special ed, in particular, the funding has ballooned over the last couple of years. And we're really what's created is a fiscal 27 proposal that is really supplemented by other resources, especially through the surtax over the last, well, ongoing for fiscal 27, charter school reimbursement, roughly level funded, similar with payment in lieu of taxes for piloting. So that's her proposal. There's a lot to go on. I'll finish up with a couple other areas in the budget later on, but I do want to talk about some outside sections. Really, outside sections are just policy, right? Policy that's added to the state budget and added different provisions. Many are non-controversial, and this has to do with motor vehicle, specifically the RMV and motor vehicle excise collections, parking ticket collections, municipal revenue. So we know how municipal revenue situation is already, but there's some provisions that were proposed by the governor as part of the House 2 proposal that would remove a process that, in essence, allows a hold to be on someone's registry of motor vehicles account when they go to re-register or renew their license. It has to do with making sure there's a hold on that account until it's paid, whether it's a parking ticket that they forgot when they're down in P-Town, or whether it's a motor vehicle excise that they probably maybe forgot about and don't want to pay. Those types of things we know. There's good intentions behind some of the proposal, but as a practical matter, we are risking millions, if not both, in terms of motor vehicle excise, billions of dollars of revenue by, I think, jeopardizing a really way to ensure collection of municipal revenue. So those are outside sections. I think Dan had mentioned some of the alerts we put out on it. That is an area you need to hear from municipal officials why they're so concerned. Why this is certainly the worst time to be thinking about something that would be jeopardizing finite or resource. Okay. So this is where I ask, what's up, everybody? What sup budget am I talking about? And in this case, I'm going to throw a couple in. What supplemental budget is really, again, supplemental budgets filed throughout the ongoing fiscal year, often deficiencies in funding that they need to pay out, reimbursements in funding, things like that. Going to close out budget as well. There's also another area for a lot of different policy. 3 different things I'll talk about. Right? Fiscal 26 surplus surtax that was filed by the right around the same time, and just over $1 billion. And this is tied to the surplus money from fiscal 25 from the fair share surtax. Directly tied to the money that is dedicated to education and transportation, part of that surtax. And this is what came in above what they were budgeting for fiscal 25. Came into play last year, roughly maybe about twice as large of that. And I think they've utilized more of it through the actual operating budget in fiscal 26, but for the surplus surtax stuff, just over $1 billion, and a couple different that special ed circuit breaker, that is $150 million that is directly those needs for fiscal 27. $7 million for unpaved roads, and there's many others. I'll save the time to not dive into a lot of things for regional transit, other areas like CMBTA is part of that as well. This is just a proposal, but this is something that's on the table towards supplementing as well as other targeted programs in the education and transportation realm. Oh, so they can't hear mine. Got it. Okay. Second one is federal tax change. So the federal tax change bill is actually related to the federal reconciliation package, which is known as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and OB3 is the shorthand for it. So for the OB3 bill that was done through the federal government, again, impacts on the healthcare system, a lot of impacts on the tax system. This specific supplemental budget is the governor's recommendation to do a couple things. I think at its core is trying to think about delaying certain aspects of implementation as it relates to the tax code to ensure, from a short-term basis, especially the first 2 years, protecting revenue that otherwise will not be coming from that. In this case, $460 million of revenue impacts that are going to be likely spread out instead of the first 2 years, into 3, 4, 5. I think there's fair questions to say what happens in year 3, 4, or 5, but it's really an important way that they've started to look at, okay, with the dust settling from this, the federal reconciliation bill, the OB3 bill, what provisions can they do to soften the blow and make sure that we are maximizing as much revenue, especially in these very challenging revenue environments. The third one I'll mention here is fiscal 26 deficiency stuff, and but just over $400 million in different deficiencies. 300 of that is actually for the Group Insurance Commission, talking about, of course, these other massive skyrocketing increases in health insurance, but also many other outside sections and some policy that the governor proposed as it relates to a state response to federal immigration enforcement. Obviously, with the tragedy in Minnesota and the ongoing national conversation on immigration enforcement, this is really focused on some of that state response, as well as interplaying with, of course, local law enforcement. As you can imagine, it's important to get right. And this is tied in, or this is, I guess, in conjunction with the executive order that the governor filed just over a month and a half ago, and also tied to separate legislative policy. I'll allude to a little bit later. Obviously, an active conversation towards how to protect our communities and our residents, but also support our local. So with that, you heard about Chapter 90 before. It's the bread and butter, a lot of exciting things, ongoing things as well. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Josie Alper.
Hey. Good morning, everybody. We'll try that. All right. So Chapter 90, very exciting news. You might remember that at our Connect 351 conference in January, Governor Healy announced her filing of her Chapter 90 transportation bond bill proposal, which was very cool. It's a $1.2 billion Chapter 90 bill. This contains a proposed 4-year authorization for that critical road and bridge funding that you all know well as Chapter 90. To speak of the actual funding level for the Chapter 90 authorization, the funding level that she's proposed remains at $300 million per year. That is using $200 million based on the old formula, the classic Chapter 90 formula, as well as $100 million that is based solely on road miles. That differentiation happened for the first time last year and was wildly popular and successful with our members, so we know that the needs are great. So we're excited to see that continue. This also includes authorizations for 4 years, so a little bit more predictability is the focus there. And there is also a bunch of other programs that are authorized through this transportation bond bill proposal, including $500 million for Mass DOT Road and Bridge Pavement Repairs Program, $200 million for transportation infrastructure that supports new housing, right? A priority of many, as well as $200 million for Parkway Resilience Improvement and Safety Modernization. That's the PRISM program that's under DCR. Lots of good stuff in here. There's also $3.2 billion to reauthorize and extend programs from the 2022 transportation bond bill. That includes federal aid and non-federal aid highway programs, as well as the municipal pavement program and shared streets and spaces municipal grants. So there's a lot going on here. There's also a new FAIR program, which is mentioned here. The governor's proposed $75 million for the funding for accelerated infrastructure repair, or FAIR program, to address municipally owned bridge conditions. So more to come on that one. Simply looking at reopening closed bridges, removing load restrictions, and preventing further deterioration of bridges. So lots of exciting investments. Again, this is just the beginning of the process. In terms of next steps, this bill has already had its hearing. We had representatives from Conway, from Yarmouth, thank you to Jeff Colby, and Sherborne to speak at the hearing with the legislators to really emphasize the importance of Chapter 90 for all members, and especially our small and rural communities as well. The chairs of that transportation committee have been really great partners on this, so we're hopeful for some action soon. Definitely keep posted, and if you have not gotten our alerts in the past previously, please let us know because we might need your help in advocating for more on Chapter 90. Now I'm going to switch gears to the Municipal Empowerment Act. This is the MEA, as we like to call it in the biz. It's just us who call it that. We think it's cute. But you might remember that the Municipal Empowerment Act, which is the bill that would modernize a lot of different municipal functions, was split into 3 different committees for review this legislative session. That is the Joint Committee on Public Service, the Joint Committee on Municipalities and Regional Government, and the Joint Committee on Revenue. So all 3 of those committees have had time to look at those provisions they've been responsible for. There have been hearings on those provisions. And where we are now is that 2 of the 3 committees have actually reported their provisions forward into the process. So we have been working hard, especially Allie on our team, who is the lead for this bill, to talk with committee staff, to talk with legislators and their staff about the value of these provisions. And you can see on the screen, there's a lot of really exciting stuff, municipal wonkiness that could be a little bit better with this bill moving forward. Some of those include permanent codification of remote public meeting options, procurement and borrowing updates, specifically adding snow hauling, which is very exciting and timely, even though hopefully we're done with the snow for this year. This would also add an enforcement mechanism for the removal of double polls. Let's hear for double polls, everybody. Very glad to hear clapping. I will tell Allie about that. Awesome. So there's a lot in this bill. It's really exciting. I think the big point that we'd like to emphasize to you all today is that we need your help to move this bill forward. We're still waiting for the Revenue Committee to move forward on their provisions. That includes an increased hotel tax from 6 to 7%, an increased meals tax of 0.75% to 1%, and a local option excise tax of up to 5%. So there's a lot of really important municipal revenue needs that could be met through this bill, and we are hoping to see some action soon from that Revenue Committee who's still reviewing that. So again, this is a priority bill for us. You will hear more from us on this bill, and if you have any questions too about what's in there, or you want to have a conversation with us about the bill, we're happy to do that. Moving on to a little bit of a different topic, we're going to talk for a minute about cannabis and the CCC, the Cannabis Control Commission. You might know that the CCC approved its regulations on social consumption, and they went into effect on January 2nd of this year. In the fall, we were talking about expecting these regulations, and now they are here and they are in effect. These regulations create 3 new license types for on-site adult use consumption. Those are supplemental licenses, which would be for existing cannabis retailers and cultivators, hospitality licenses for new or existing non-cannabis businesses, and event organizer licenses. Right now, the CCC and this process is in a bit of a holding pattern because there are several advisory groups meeting and trying to work out the details, and also municipalities are working to approve bylaws and other frameworks to opt in to this social consumption. There will also need to be new host community agreements for these licenses based on how much time it took for cannabis delivery to get rolling. We estimate that we won't see legal social consumption rather, for another 18 or so months. So still in the works, but I would encourage you, and we are all encouraging you, to start thinking about what your municipality might want to do with this new series of options. And quickly on cannabis, I do want to mention that there's also been some legislative action here. The House and Senate have both passed their own versions of cannabis reform legislation that was aimed to restructure the CCC and specifically its governance. Those bills, both of them, are now in conference committee, right? So that's 3 members and 3 members working out the differences between the bills. And I just want to mention a couple of quick provisions you might be curious about that's in either one of those bills. Both bills would reduce the CCC's membership from 5 to 3 members. A couple of differences. The House bill has some provisions that would reform and regulate hemp-derived products and CBD products. But unfortunately, their approach puts a lot of that enforcement framework onto local boards of health to conduct investigation and analysis. So that's something that we've pushed back on, and we're hoping to see a little bit of wiggle room there. The Senate version of the bill contains a provision that would allow delivery of cannabis to any municipality, whether or not you allow retail cannabis sales. So that could be a big impact. And there is a way to say no to that, but a municipality would need to file a no waiver from the CCC every 2 years to be able to opt out of that delivery. The conference committee convened in mid-January, and we're expecting action on this sometime soon. Of course, Dave mentioned kind of the pressures of getting towards that July 31 deadline, but we do expect this to move because it is already in conference committee, which gives it a little bit more oomph. Switching on to my neck of the woods, which is the energy and environmental world. It's no surprise to you down here on the Cape. There's a lot going on in the energy and environmental world. The first that I want to mention is energy affordability legislation. Last year, Governor Healy filed her energy affordability bill. This was a piece of legislation. She also filed some separate regulatory movements, the energy affordability agenda, and there's a lot of information out there about this initiative. Ultimately, her bill started a larger conversation about how to balance energy affordability concerns of residents while still continuing to promote clean energy and energy capacity in general here in Massachusetts. At the end of last year, House members of the Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy Committee, that's the kind of big energy committee that typically reviews these big bills, they moved forward their own version of an energy affordability bill that was pretty instantly met with disagreement from the environmental community. That's because it contained a provision to make certain 2030 climate goals non-enforceable if certain federal policy actions and affordability criteria were met. Because of that pushback, the people who were considering this walkback have walked back that idea. That is no longer in the legislation that is on the table. And since that proposal, the House had been discussing various proposals of how to get costs off of bills and how to find this balance. And they ultimately redrafted a bill and debated and engrossed a bill on February 26th. So pretty recently, we have some key priorities, again, balancing the need for affordability, but also maintaining the essential energy efficiency supports that our municipalities and our residents benefit from. So there's a lot of give and take that needs to be figured out as the Senate is now going to take this bill up in the next couple of weeks and months ahead. So that is the big scoop on energy affordability. I also want to mention another bigger legislative vehicle, which was mentioned earlier, the Environmental Bond Bill. This is the Mass Ready Act you might have heard about, another Governor Healy proposal that is now off to the Senate for review. This is a $2.9 billion bond bill, which contains a lot of really key authorizations for cities and towns, including the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, $315 million proposed in that program for the next 5 years or so. You might be familiar, our request is for $500 million for the MVP program to really meet the need as a really widely successful program that almost 99% of communities have participated in to date. There's also $385 million for the Clean Water Trust and a new resilience revolving fund, which would help kind of capture some of the critical public infrastructure projects that maybe are not eligible under current grant and loan programs in Massachusetts. So some exciting options, hopefully some good support, and something that we envision moving by the end of the session, most definitely. And also there might be other things that we'll be able to tack on as the Senate takes up the bill. And as we are looking to, the amendment process, there's a lot more to be said about this. So definitely if there are chances to weigh in on either of these, feel free to reach out to us or to your legislators to emphasize how important these bills are moving forward in the process. All right. I hope you expected me to talk about clean energy siting and permitting because I would love to talk about it. There is so much going on in clean energy right now. I know that's no stranger to you on the Cape. There has just been a March 1, 2026 deadline that we've passed for the state to finalize regulations from the 2024 climate bill that was passed. That act put forward a series of consolidated, streamlined permitting for both state and local review of clean energy projects across the state. The regulations for small projects, which will be permitted by local governments, have been finalized. The law requires a streamlined permitting process for batteries, for solar, for wind, for clean energy transmission and distribution infrastructure, really a big range of projects this would apply to. For local projects, all necessary permits except electrical and street opening permits will need to be consolidated and wrapped up into one final permit that's issued by the local government. So your zoning decision, your conservation commission, your wetlands commission, all of those decisions would need to be completed together and within 12 months. So that's a big change. And another change I want to mention is that any appeals to the local permitting process would only be done once the final decision is issued. So there's only going to be one opportunity for appeals under this new consolidated pathway. You'll have 12 months to review this. I know this is a bit technical and we have more information on our website, and I'm happy to talk afterwards or answer questions about this. I do want to mention that this process is technically optional. A developer could choose to use the existing permitting process that you go through right now in your town, but there's a lot on the line if you opt out of reviewing a consolidated permit application that they submit to you, because starting October 1st of this year, a developer can submit a consolidated permit application to your municipality. If the developer is not able to complete that process with you with this consolidated permit, they would then be able to ask the Energy Facilities Siting Board to review and permit that project, which has a different implication for municipal authority and control in that decision. So I want to mention that, and especially that October 1 deadline. So that is my big message, is it is time to think about who in your municipality is best suited to accept and manage this consolidated permitting process. Guidelines are still being finalized. There's actually a public comment period that's open through the end of the day today. Those relate to pre-filing conditions, public health standards, environmental standards, and a lot of other details are actually written in guidelines rather than the regulations. So it's a bit of a ping pong approach here, but the big picture is that it's time to start setting up on this. And I'm very curious to hear any thoughts or comments as we get into the Q&A. But before we get there, hopefully I've charged it up enough for Dave to keep going with the work ahead. Thank you so much, everybody.
See, Josie took proper direction to talk to our friends, make sure they can earn them online. So I'll hopefully not disappoint everybody. So let's round it up with a couple of different things before we open up for questions and talk a little bit about some of the work ahead. As you can see, a couple of different areas, right? A lot of this is context. Talked about the when are we in this process of this home stretch over the next months. But obviously, I don't need to tell you which. Raise your little show of hands for communities that are considering or actively pursuing overrides right now. How about keep your hands up if revenue is tight at the local level, right? Okay. So we know it's tough out there. We know it does seem like there's a convergence of a lot of different areas. I'll mention the reports in a second, but obviously the fiscal outlook in the Commonwealth is so important too. And there are probably more variables, or there's more aspects of volatility in recent memory, right? There's been big challenges in the past, right? I don't want to have any necessarily recency bias, but it does add to the volatility of what the impact of to the state is going to be, as well as what the impact to the state revenue picture could be, the clouds in the horizon, the federal government policy changes, both direct funding and otherwise. But I do know, in this case, I mentioned the 9C expanded authority. There's been ideas before to try to make the state protected as much as possible to have that authority. But again, that didn't come into fruition. So I think we all need to be in a situation we can understand where the state's at, we can understand obviously what you all are living at the local level and your residents and taxpayers are living. But at the same time, we don't necessarily want this self-fulfilling prophecy of, well, it's going to be the worst budget year. But still consistently talk about the needs out there because we know they are great. Federal impact, so I talked about obviously the OB3 legislation, its impact on the healthcare system, really important as we think of the implications short and medium and long term, but also with federal immigration. This is absolutely something that is really growing in terms of as a priority in the House and Senate. I think both the Speaker and Senate President have alluded as much. And there's a couple different areas. I know I mentioned before. I mentioned the governor's supplemental budget that had some provisions related to this of how to prohibit federal immigration enforcement in certain areas, like churches, like schools, like otherwise. And then there's other active conversations towards what they're trying to explicitly require or otherwise for local law enforcement, especially with state and under the state's Supreme Court decision related to, or the Lund decision that does already training what local law enforcement can do with federal immigration. So there's the Protect Act, that's a provision, really a large legislative package that the Black and Latino Caucus had proposed, and we've already had some active conversations with the House and Senate on what their next steps are and what they're taking under consideration. Of course, the impact on local law enforcement will be very important, and making sure it's, we're following the leadership, especially of the Chiefs Association, on how that will play out and what the impact could be. Another way to enhance it, who's heard about the ballot questions, everybody? I won't ask which one or group of them, but there's a lot. There's a lot of potential ballot questions. There are up to 12 ballot questions. One has to do with a strict repeal of recent gun reform legislation. So that is actually separate of the other 11. That's going to be on the ballot. The other 11 they've been certified through the process. They have been gotten the appropriate signatures and otherwise. It is going to be a very busy ballot season towards what is on the table. There's some provisions related to the income tax, reducing the income tax over the next couple of years, which of course would beg a very important question towards what the impact on the state revenue picture would be. That's the fiscal outlook I talked about. That is under rent control or rent stabilization is central to the ballot question as well. There's one provision on starter home, local government, local zoning preemption as it relates to that. Cannabis, what Josie just covered on all the developments of the cannabis industry, something that would basically, for the most part, repeal a recreational cannabis industry in the Commonwealth. Election day voter registration. There's so many. There's many of them. But where it is right now is the legislature has until early May to make a decision on whether they will enact any of those proposals. That's still under active consideration, but right now the next steps are over the next several weeks going really similar to a traditional bill hearing, right? They're taking them as drafted as legislation, and the Special Joint Committee on Initiative Petitions is going to continue a lot of these hearings over the next couple of months, next couple of weeks rather, on hearing both from the proponents, from opponents, and other subject matter experts. So that is on the table. I know it does kind of add to that mix of a lot of different priorities that are already going on in the paper. That's again an important and big backdrop to it, especially for things like an income tax reduction, which of course would threaten a lot of budgetary conversations we've already talked about. And then a couple of different areas. It's hard to be reductive to these top issues in just one portion of a slide. Healthcare. We know for the healthcare, health insurance in particular, there are several. There's I think a series of task force and otherwise that are kind of working together towards potential solutions, but it's very evident there is no, especially with the federal reconciliation, the OB3 bill, there's no silver bullet for solving these problems. But the need is tremendous in terms of healthcare access, but of course, from a municipal standpoint, what does it mean for municipal budgets and municipal employees? Of course, both protecting healthcare access as well as making sure premiums aren't, and the double crazy digit increase they did. It's everywhere, but it still doesn't negate the massive fiscal challenge it's been for communities in supporting this system. Housing, you heard from Senator Sear. It's obviously a major priority here in the Cape and the Islands, and of course, it's a priority across the state as well. It looks differently everywhere, but that's part of the game. And specifically with housing, I expect different action on what their housing ideas and policy solutions will be, and will of course be very central to those conversations. And workforce, continues to be a massive challenge at the municipal workforce level, right? Of getting not just skilled employees, but really a pipeline of people into this important public service work. It feels like public service is harder to do every single day. And then as we think about other issues, countless of other issues, but what it's adding to is this larger mix of areas that we worry about this kind of bandwidth challenge, is why the United Municipal Voice, all of you, not just on behalf of the Cape and the Islands, but all municipalities speaking with one voice on top priorities is going to be so essential over these next couple of months in this kind of home stretch I'd mentioned. And I mentioned last year to kind of land it here, the Municipal Empowerment Act, right? It's fallen into this larger conversation. It's a priority of the governor. I know there's local option taxes that have kind of sometimes been reduced, that bill just to that provision. You saw that applause for double polls, right? But there's so much opportunity with this bill that we cannot lose sight of this important opportunity to push the legislature to get this done this year and get it on the governor's desk before the year is up. So it's such a, that there's so many different things to add to it, other ideas, but it's going to be a big thing as we look over the next couple of months. And then I'll just end here before we go to Q&A. The MMA did 2 reports, right? A perfect storm and a navigating storm. A lot of storm analogies, but as it relates to these specific areas, we know, we're out there, we're at Ledge Breakfast, we're at different member groups, we're listening to all of you, listening to members about, especially these fiscal conditions. And, in some cases, there's always more resources needed at the local level, right? But at the same time, this is seen to be much bigger than that, or much bigger than something that is even just acutely in one portion of the state or otherwise. So what we're really trying to focus to do is look at the picture more broadly. Prop 2.5 is a big part of that. There's state aid is a central part to that. And thinking about what does this mean for the Commonwealth and what does this mean for the Commonwealth's 301 cities and towns. And the data reflects that, yeah, it's a challenge everywhere, and this is something that is impacting all communities. So as we think about solutions, that gets into the second portion of the report, focus on state aid and many other policy provisions. There is no perfect solution outside of areas that are going to be able to be that rising tide to lift all communities, as well as something that is focused on understanding this narrative that's not really anyone's fault, but it's something that needs to be addressed. Otherwise, the Commonwealth is not going to move forward the way we all want it to. So with that, that's the end of the presentation, everybody. Let's hear some questions. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the question, I'll just repeat the question. What I understand the question to be is how do you kind of reconcile the Clean Air Act and the prohibitions on smoking inside with this new idea and concept towards social consumption and social consumption of sites? Correct. So my understanding is that some of the recent legislation from a couple of years ago did add a provision that would open that door to be from a regulatory standpoint to be able to create that carve out for smoking. So it is not just edible; it's also inclusive of smoking indoors, which I know is. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and thank you for the question too, and I think it does dive right into this area that yes, it is opt-in, it is optional for community to do, but as Josie's realized, I'm not trying to make make fun of the Cannabis Control Commission here, but for something that it's been several years to just get to this point, and then several years, it just there's a lot of details that need to get done, but at the same time, for the pace that they do it is also mind-boggling at the same time. But that's just me. Any other questions? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. So the question had to do with speed cameras and really this automated enforcement idea towards different cameras that can help speed enforcement as it relates to citations and otherwise that of course are focused on public safety needs. There's several different proposals still on active conversations on Beacon Hill. We've discussed a few with key legislators from a couple different points, right? We know first and foremost, this is about public safety, but at the same time, and this would be something that would be opted on, available to the community. But at the same time, revenue in terms of the financing of it can't be lost because at the same time, you don't want there to be a difficult decision between, okay, this is a public safety benefit, but at the same time, okay, how are we going to actually finance it? Do we, really the dollars and cents of it all. And that's, I think, been a central part to us to make sure that I think that financial incentive is there. Not that it needs to be a massive moneymaker because public safety, of course, is going to be the focus of it. But that's been an area part of those conversations that we've been having. I will say, as it relates to some of the challenges with federal immigration enforcement, a lot of the conversations around privacy, dealing with speed cameras has kind of conflated into that state. So I think there's still a lot of appetite. There's still a lot of energy behind it. I think there's still a lot in play, but that is one, I think, caveat I'll add because as related, you saw the Super Bowl commercial, they got a lot of pushback, right? It's in a similar way towards, okay, what concern would there be from a lot of privacy groups? But still on the table. Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah, so I think that the general question had to do with, there's several federal agencies that are nonpartisan that help kind of do a full analysis on different fiscal impacts and other policy impacts on different legislation and tying where we are in the state. Short answer is no, there's not there's been conversations of it, but there's nothing that exists outside of the role that obviously the Ways and Means Committees play. But I know they're not the first person that kind of raised those concerns on a characterization that sometimes has its own qualifiers towards what does it mean, as well as some confusion on what does this mean for a community, what does this mean for ratepayers, and how does this kind of fall to them. So the short answer is no, but I think you raise an important point, Kevin, on some of the challenges on a lot of these things, which is why we're so gainfully employed here. Yes, sir. Are they calling it Prop 4? But I think you're right in terms of reducing it to 4. Yeah, no, okay. But I mean, the polling I've seen is that it is very popular. I'm sorry, yeah. And so the question, yes, the question had to do specifically with polling and other characterizations on the current potential ballot question as it relates to the income tax reduction. And from all the polling I've seen is that it is very popular in terms of passing. That is also very early in terms of from a ballot question point of view. This is very, very early process, but for proponents of an income tax reduction, I would say that's a good start. For folks that would be concerned about any potential impact on state revenue, it's going to be, I think, an important case to make on what's at stake and why it may be not in the best interest. I know the governor has shared her opposition to it, and as well as folks in the legislature. But I'd say as it just relates to if it was on the ballot today, I would expect it to pass. Which I think does bring us to a larger conversation on. We're going to have the special joint committee on initiative petitions, both of these ballot questions. We should take them all seriously because I mean they got to this point, and as we think about where it goes from the next months, so. Mm-hmm. You can see Josie moving it. Now this is her bread and butter, so for better or worse. So I'll just repeat the question and then I'll have Josie jump in. It had to do just the clarifying the impact of these changes with citing and permitting changes and what does it mean to current zoning and other local processes.
All right, someone cut me off if I go too long. I won't forget the Zoomers. I'm a Zoomer most of the time here. So, all right. So the consolidated local permitting process. From the time that an application is deemed complete, the municipality will have 12 months to complete all of the individual reviews. So Conservation Commission kicks off, Planning and Zoning kicks off. They can continue to have their separate and individual processes, their own timelines, their own communications, materials, hearings, but all of those decisions have to be completed and wrapped up. Like I'm imagining, and this is not fleshed out yet, that the planning board issues their decision, they send that to someone in town hall, and that person in town hall packages the zoning package, the Conservation Commission package, and they put it all into one PDF or one file. And that is then sent and shared with the applicant as an approval or as a denial of the entire permit. So it's a little complicated, right? Because you've not had to do this, communication and coordination between boards and commissions before. Another caveat is that if one board or commission, their vote is no, the entire project is a no. So if all of your boards and commissions say yes, except for one, the project is still denied. What the Department of Energy Resources, who is making this process, what they are recommending is for communities to aim to complete review within 10 months so that you have a little bit of wiggle room to put all the packages together and to, correct any outstanding materials from a commission or a board. But ultimately, you're going to have to figure out how to work together. And there's going to be one person or a couple people that will be designated at the local level as the local government representative. That person is responsible for receiving the application, determining if it's complete within 30 days of receiving the application. So that's another time clock. And once that 30-day time period has expired or the completeness determination is issued, that starts the 12-month review process. So that's kind of where we're at right now. It's a great question. So the question for folks on Zoom was, does the initial application begin that process? If there are changes along the way, what happens then? The intention of this entire process from the state, from the legislators who have put this in place, is to get the best application possible at the beginning of the process. The way that they have been talking about the pre-filing engagement requirements, which are going to be requirements of the developers to meet with the community before the project has even been submitted. There's going to be a thorough checklist of what their responsibilities are. They have really front-loaded, hopefully, a lot of the common issues that you see at Town Hall. You're missing this document, you've submitted this map, but your proposal was for a different site. You know, some problems like that will hopefully be resolved before you even get to the point where that 12-month clock starts. At the same time, we've never done this before, right? So it's going to take some learning, and what I'd recommend to all of you in this room is to get in touch with your regional siting and permitting coordinator. If you don't know them, you have a person. I think you all have the same one down here on the Cape, Connor Rocket. He's very smart. Their whole team is ready to help in kind of looking at what you should be thinking about and also to prepare for your review. But ultimately, that's the intention, is that the application you receive is ready to review from the day that you determine it's complete. There are some safeguards of, if there is, a very obvious lack of willingness to proceed, or, there will be some discretion for the Department of Energy Resources to say that your developer is not working in good faith with you, that sort of thing. But ultimately, most of the headaches will hopefully be resolved at the beginning of the process. That's my hope.
Yes.
I appreciate it. And in the delegation, I think the state wildlife protection fund and the state high regulation is going on good work on us. We've both been obviously a lot of good work on post advocating at town meeting to actually get these projects built. However, one of the weakest links in that chain is that once these projects pass town meeting, the homeowners are going to get stuck with the bill, have to build the highways, their backyard, or any slew of other expenses that come with it. The county's been doing a lot of work through the ARPA fund in order to create subsidized loans for homeowners. However, still a big expense on top of mortgages. And those loans actually come from the same pool of money as the Development Protection Fund, the SRF. So unlike the towns, they get the homeowners aren't eligible right now for any sort of loan forgiveness that comes with that SRF money. And obviously, if there was an opportunity for loan forgiveness, something we have should guide, but fiscally intensive initiative, it would make these projects a lot easier to pass the town meeting, and folks are confident they have finance mechanism for it. Is that something that is conversation currently around the environmental law bill? Is there an opportunity for advocacy for towns in order to make that a reality for that process? Or does the environmental law bill not make sense? That kind of thing.
Great question. Josie's here.
It is a good question for folks on Zoom. The question was about loan forgiveness specifically for homeowners and whether there is a path for that sort of advocacy and provision in the environmental bond bill. I would say currently there's not something I could see in the bond bill as it is right now that would provide individual homeowners any sort of loan forgiveness. I think there's generally an opportunity and a conversation to bolster and support the existing SRF, which hopefully, would infuse that pot of money. But at the time, I don't think there is anything in there. I would certainly encourage you to have conversations with your legislators about it, because now is the time. That's kind of the words of wisdom I have. I'm not sure if it has anything to add.
Well said. I think the short of it as it relates to the environmental law bill is, as it's made it through several committees at this point, and for the most part stayed intact, we would expect it to change significantly as we get to the next steps of the process. Is next in the Senate. And we expect probably or fairly soon for that action in the Senate. So it'll go to the Senate first and then go back to the House. But as we talk about the home stretch, this is exactly the time where that is our business, a moving vehicle to get things added or changed or otherwise. So as it relates to certainly the larger intent where you're mentioning of these larger environmental needs in our communities, as well as protecting the fiscal impact, it's exactly the timing is right on it.
How it is that will be distributed in various towns and states, and is going to be different from the form of the municipal traditional state aid.
Well, the special ed circuit breaker in particular is tied directly from a formula from the student opportunity, or updated through the Student Opportunity Act. It does allow reimbursement for transportation and otherwise. So the formula has remained the same in terms of the funding, but it is really designed to be primarily a reimbursement program. The tricky part is you're reimbursing it, after the fact. So depending on your schools, depending on how that's financed, that's where the biggest rub has been there, especially over the last 3 years, where that funding has almost doubled. I think it has doubled in terms of its need due to some rate increases and otherwise. So that's less of a formula change in terms of two communities, but reflective of some of the needs that depends on, that obviously is going to hit school districts differently for transportation costs, as well as what I guess likely what they have in district for special ed services. Yes. Yeah. Hey, George. Yeah.
You don't have that. You don't have the power, so you don't sit as a town. You guys, you're in a good position, and that's why I wanted to come. But the reason why my question was polls, and why the polls are always changing. And in our town, we have almost 200 miles of road, and when they move polls in our town, they don't necessarily tell. And then when they change their top wire for the power, everybody else below that has to move their pole. You have, for example, in our town, on those poles, we have fiber optics. We have to move all that first to the new pole before anybody else moves. That's possible. Last 15 months, $20,000 of our own cost to move our wire. Is there a plan? If we can read that fiber optic, we would just have to, and then those poles would always just be there with the power at the top of the old pole with everybody else's services. Somewhere along the line, somebody, I know you they have something called engine. And who looks at that?
Yeah. So George, well said, and sorry. Yes. The question was related to double poles and the pole system as it relates to utility pole ownership and otherwise, and obviously the friction between that and municipalities. I think generally with the Municipal Empowerment Act, there's I think an important opportunity on this issue. The good thing is municipalities are in the right. There's both state law that actually has requirements on pole removal on pole owners that is not enforced. And not enforced at all. And naturally, with that system of both pole owners and attachers and a fining system that is tied towards pole owners, you just have all these people just kind of concerned about, okay, well, this is why it's so complex, because we have a proprietary system that apparently everyone should know about it. With that being said, there's been, I think, a different approach with coming off of a redraft of some of those provisions that the governor proposed, and we're still actually working through some of those. In particular, but what is, I think, ideal from it is this is not going to be punitive to municipalities in any way, but it's trying to get everyone part of that system to act in a certain amount of time that is making progress on this, right? If we continue to hear, well, I think we're doing a little bit better than it's a terrible system, and it's incredibly challenging. It's a public safety hazard, not aesthetically, we know what it looks like. So I think there's a lot of traction on that issue, and I think as you talk about your excitement, George, coming out to the Cape and United Force of the Cape and Island. I think for all municipalities, this is a really important issue, with the MEA being a good legislative vehicle for it to really get some important traction on it that actually make some progress. So there were, I think, good opportunities ahead on that, but you're right in terms of the frustration. Yeah. Yeah, no, and especially as we talk about energy affordability. I mean, this is all tied into it. Clean energy is all tied into the same system that is creating a lot of challenges. So that's why I think there is an important situation of opportunity here to make progress on it. So I think we're just over time, so I want to be mindful of that. Myself and the team will be here in case you do have maybe one final question we want to know. Happy question. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well said, and I'll paraphrase from online, but it had to do with the local option transfer fee for housing, affordable housing, for funding affordable housing trusts. Obviously, likely really the most active, but reflects this larger conversation on how do we find revenue that can help really directly produce the supply for affordable housing. Because we talk about, like, obviously for the MMA, as we talk about challenging things like zoning and upzoning and how we a lot of the greater Boston density conversations, for us protecting local control. This is something that is actually trying to be focused towards the actual production rather than the conceptual production that other efforts there. So the transfer fee unfortunately wasn't included in, obviously, the Affordable Homes Act. That is an area that we continue to bang the drum on as an important area for a lot of different housing solutions. I think we need to continue. I think the Cape has provided significant leadership on. I think between both the statewide efforts as well as other parts of the state, I think we should keep that pressure on towards a solution that is really a locally derived solution that's going to help locally derived affordable housing. That's exactly part of the solution, knowing that there is, like anything else, no silver bullet, but why not this? Such a high cost housing market. So some traction there, but as we talk about a lot of the balance with all these other things, that's where I worry about all of these things or potentially other high priority areas not getting done, because we need a big focus on what we want to push for housing, what we want to push out in terms of the budgetary needs, environmental needs, and so many others. But I think the Cape's done a great job, and I think we all need to do a great part in supporting those types of ideas.
Well done.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you online.
Well done.
All right, that's it.
Very much appreciated. All right, we're going to get ready to adjourn in a few minutes. But before we do, I would want to thank David and the MMA staff. They're going to stick around for a little while, so that if you have individual questions you'd like to speak to them about, by all means, approach them before they leave. And once again, thank you, David, Josie, team. Great to see you. Don't be strangers. We meet every second Tuesday every month, except for July and August. Which brings me to our next meeting. So our next meeting will be on Friday. Actually, we've been having discussions with Mass DOT. We're going to be organizing a special meeting to get an update on the Cape Cod Canal Bridge replacement program. We're going to do that at the county as an in-person hybrid meeting, so you can tap into it by Zoom, and that's going to be on April 6th at 1 p.m. We're We're going to be doing that at the Mary Pat Flynn Conference Center, but we're also going to set it up as a hybrid meeting. So if you can't be there in person, you can participate through Teams or Zoom or some other. We'll get a link out to people. That's April 6th. So make a note on your calendar, April 6th. We'll be sending a notice out on that at 1 p.m. After that, on Friday, April 10th, 7:30, we're going to be at the Yarmouth Senior Center. And we're going to be talking about this. This was touched on a little bit by David a little while ago. And that is what's happening at the state level, what's going on with ICE enforcement. The state is looking at expanding the restrictions on access for ICE personnel, immigrations and customs personnel on public buildings. And so one of the concerns that we have here on the Cape is while there may be some interest in that and support for that, the issue is going to be enforcement, particularly limitations on local property, local facilities. Who's going to do that? Who's going to pay for that? There's some issues, some real issues at the local level in terms of creating problems and some difficulties for local police. So at our meeting on April 10th, we will have local police chiefs there to explain their take on what's happening at the State House. So that's going to be a very, very important meeting. Make a note of that if you're particularly interested in this topic. Bring not only yourself, but colleagues that might have an interest in it, or even your police chief. Kevin Lennon, the Yarmouth police chief, has been very immersed in this with the Chiefs Association. And in addition to him, the Orleans police chief, Scott McDonald, who's I'm a fan of. He's an outstanding police chief, and he represents the police chief community here on the Cape quite well. So we're going to have both of those chiefs there, and I'm sure there'll be other chiefs stepping in. But I think that's an issue that we have to pay close attention to because this is moving fast on Beacon Hill, and there are potentially local implications to all of this. On the April 10th, that's Cape and Islands Municipal Leaders Association. This is our association meeting on the 10th. All right, Jim. And then in May 8th, we'll be in Provincetown. We're going to be set up there. Leslie's working on this. We're going to be at the so-called Provincetown Commons. It's the old rec center building in Provincetown. We thought it would be good to get to Provincetown before the summer season descends on us and there's no place to park. So it's time to get to Provincetown. It's been a while since we've been there. And the topic for that conversation, again, that's May 8th at 7:30. Dan Ravella, he's the assistant town administrator in Provincetown, but he's also the former communications director for the city of Cambridge. And he's outstanding. We're going to talk about communications challenges in the age of rage and misinformation. So one of the increasing challenges that we have as municipal, county communicators is how do we engage? How do we deal with all this? I know in Yarmouth, we have people that come to town meeting in a completely different planet on local issues. They're just they have a different set of facts. And this is what's happening. This used to be a national problem, but now it's a local problem. We have people coming to our meetings and town meetings operating from a completely different set of facts. And it creates very unique challenges for us, for municipal officials, particularly at town meeting and at hearings and other select board forums. So that meeting, I think, will be an important one in May. So, and then in June, the association will be doing its canal boat ride. That's been probably the most well-attended and the most enjoyable of all of the meetings that we do, and that's on June 12th. So mark your calendars. So that's the latest. That's what's coming up. Another plug, we're going to be in June making a decision or an update in terms of our board. So board members that are interested in stepping down will be filling vacancies. So if you're interested in being on the nominating committee to help us reset our board and make recommendations at the June meeting, let me or Ed know if you'd like to work with us and be on the nominating committee. So is there any other business to come before our association? Ed? Wow. 20 years it's been. Thanks, Ed. So Ed is, for folks on Zoom, it's been 20 years since we've been in Provincetown, so maybe there might be an opportunity for some of the Zoom folks to join us as well. Is there any other business to come before the association? Before we adjourn, I'm just going to ask our board members to come up to the head table here so we can just really briefly convene for 5 minutes and then we can depart. So do I have a motion to adjourn? All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you very much. And thanks again, MMA and Cape Cod Regional Tech.
Bye, Zoomers.